I always thought I understood how quickly life could change, until the day it collapsed beneath me. One moment, I was walking into work with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth. The next, I was staring at a termination letter stamped with a single word that felt like a slap across the face. Redundancy. They said I wasn't needed. They said the company could function perfectly without me. And for a moment, I almost believed them. But as I packed my things, something inside me twisted. Not fear. Not sadness. Something sharper. A sense that something about their decision wasn't just cold, it was wrong. Deeply wrong. And the more I replayed the way they looked at me, the whispers behind closed doors, the rushed signatures on paperwork, the more I realized this wasn't an accident. Someone wanted me gone. Someone thought I would simply disappear. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. Because while they celebrated eliminating what they thought was a problem, they hadn't yet discovered the truth. One detail so critical it could bring everything they'd built crashing down. And I was the only one who knew it. The question is, when they finally realized the mistake they made, do you think they begged for forgiveness? Or for mercy? Before everything unraveled, my life followed a rhythm I had worked years to build. I wasn't wealthy, not in the glamorous sense people like to show online, but I was stable.
Proud.
Grounded. My mornings started early, usually before sunrise, when the air was still cool and the world felt quiet enough for me to gather my thoughts. I'd sip my coffee at the kitchen counter while reviewing reports for the facility I oversaw, an operation that ran on precision, safety, and the kind of attention to detail most people never saw. I liked it that way. I liked being the one who held things together. Work wasn't just a job for me, it was a responsibility. I held a specialty operating license that took years of training, exams, and long nights of studying. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. Without someone qualified, the facility couldn't legally function. Most days, that weight felt like purpose. Other days, it felt like a secret burden only I carried. But either way, it was mine. My colleagues, well, I used to think we were a team. Not friends, exactly, but people who understood the push and pull of running a demanding operation. I didn't need praise. I just needed respect. And for the most part, I thought I had it. I'd catch nods of acknowledgement, hear the occasional good call muttered after a crisis was avoided. But there were moments, quick, passing ones, that didn't sit right with me. A door that suddenly went quiet when I walked by. A strange tone in a meeting, like I had missed a joke that wasn't meant for me. Papers that seemed to shuffle a little too quickly out of sight. At first, I brushed it off. Everyone goes through phases where work feels different.
Off.
I told myself I was imagining it, that the late nights were catching up to me, that stress could twist any harmless moment into something darker. And on the surface, life outside work balanced things out. I had a small apartment I loved, plants I always forgot to water but somehow kept alive, and weekend routines that gave me something to look forward to. As far as I knew, my life was intact. Still, there was this lingering feeling, an intuition I couldn't quite name. I'd catch myself replaying interactions on my way home, trying to figure out why certain meetings felt rushed or why my supervisor's smile had grown a little too thin around the edges. It was like a subtle shift in the air, the kind you don't notice until it's already moving around you. But I kept going. I always kept going. Because when you've worked hard for something, you don't expect the ground to disappear beneath your feet. You trust the systems in place. You trust the people you work with. You trust that your value is obvious, undeniable. And maybe that was my mistake. Looking back, the signs were there, just faint enough to ignore but sharp enough to leave a mark in hindsight. Small changes in scheduling. Access logs that didn't make sense. A growing distance I didn't understand. I didn't know it then, but the decisions that would shatter everything had already been made. The betrayal wasn't sudden. It was built silently, piece by piece, behind walls I wasn't meant to see. If I had paused long enough to listen to my instincts, maybe I would have been prepared. Maybe I would have seen who was pulling the strings. But I was still living in the calm before the storm, unaware that every normal day was simply a countdown. And when that countdown hit zero, I had no idea just how deliberate, how calculated the fall would be. The days leading up to my termination were a blur of small, unsettling details, none damning enough on their own, but together forming a pattern I couldn't ignore. At first, it was the shift changes. I'd log in to check the roster and notice my hours shrinking, redistributed to people who didn't have half my training. Not enough to raise alarms, but enough to make me feel, I don't know, replaced. Phase by phase, responsibility by responsibility. Then came the locked files, digital reports I used to access freely, now suddenly marked with permissions I supposedly no longer had. When I asked about it, they brushed it off as an IT glitch. I wanted to believe that. Part of me still trusted the explanations, still clung to the idea that miscommunication was the worst thing happening here. But the real shift began the day I overheard my supervisor inside his office. His door was cracked open just enough for voices to slip through, a conversation too hushed, too careful. I wasn't meant to hear it, but I did. Terms like budget cut, streamlined staffing, and optics floated out like warning signs. Then my name, spoken plainly, almost clinically, like I was a line item on a spreadsheet instead of a person. I froze, not knowing whether to reveal myself or walk away silently. I walked away, but something in me chilled. Still, I brushed it aside. I convinced myself they were reviewing all the staff. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I reminded myself that I held the only operating license qualified for our facility. Terminating me wouldn't just be reckless, it would shut everything down. No one would be that foolish. But I hadn't yet learned how far people would go to protect their own interests. The real unraveling began on a Friday. I had stayed late to finish compliance reviews. The building was quiet, but not silent. There were footsteps, too light to be security, too hurried to be casual. When I walked toward the main administrative office, I saw light slicing through the crack beneath the door. Someone was inside, long after everyone should have gone home. I hesitated, then approached. And through the slim opening, I saw my personnel files sprawled across the desk, papers, copies, reports, even old evaluations. My supervisor and another manager hovered above it, whispering. One of them pointed at a document, then shook his head. The other nodded as if agreeing to something final. My chest tightened. I stepped back before they could spot me, retreating into the dark hallway. Suddenly, the pieces clicked, the shift changes, restricted files, cold responses, tense glances. It wasn't random. It was preparation. They weren't reviewing the staff. They were preparing to cut me out. I barely slept that weekend. I replayed every sign I had ignored, every instinct I had silenced. By Monday morning, fatigue weighed on me like stone. But I still walked into work like everything was normal, because I needed to see how far they'd go. I needed to know the truth. The truth arrived at 10:17 a.m., folded in a crisp envelope and delivered with a practiced tone I will never forget. Your role has been deemed redundant. Effective immediately. No remorse. No explanation beyond corporate jargon. Just a hollow, sanitized message. The kind designed to make you feel like a number. I didn't cry. Not then. I didn't argue either. I simply stood there, absorbing the finality of their decision. The betrayal wasn't in the words, it was in how quickly they dismissed everything I had carried for them. Years of work, expertise, dedication, gone with a signature. But even then, they didn't understand the scope of what they'd done. As I packed my belongings, I caught a glimpse of two managers through the glass wall, their expressions tight with anticipation. No regret, not discomfort, relief. Like removing me was a victory. Something they had planned, rehearsed, executed. And beneath that realization burned something fierce, betrayal curdling into anger. When I walked out of the building, the sun felt too bright, the air too sharp. I held the box of my belongings like it was proof of a crime. Because that's what it felt like. Not a redundancy. Not a business decision. A deliberate act designed to erase me cleanly. But they had miscalculated, badly. That evening, as I sat cross-legged on my living room floor, I dug through my credentials. My operating license. My certifications. My renewal approvals. Everything that made me the sole qualified operator for the entire facility. Every year, I update it. Every test passed. Every requirement is fulfilled. I was the one who held the legal authority to keep the operation running. Not my supervisor. Not management.
Me.
And suddenly, everything made sense. They didn't check. They didn't look. They didn't care. They thought they could discard me cleanly, without consequence. They thought I'd go quietly, humiliated and forgotten. But their ignorance was a weapon, and it was already loaded. Still, I needed to be sure. I needed confirmation. So I combed through the state's regulatory website, double-checking the licensing database. And when I saw my name listed as the only active, certified operator for our facility, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just carelessness. This was negligence, monumental, potentially catastrophic negligence. And they had walked straight into it. The next morning before dawn, I drove back to the building, not inside, not to confront them, but to sit in my car and watch. The parking lot began to fill.
Cars pulled up.
Employees hurried inside. Lights flickered on. Then, nearly an hour after shift started, I saw it. Managers pacing, phones pressed to their ears, frantic movements slicing through the windows. Something was wrong. Something had collapsed faster than they could contain it. And I knew exactly what it was. Because without a licensed operator on site, the facility couldn't legally run. Any work done without proper supervision was a violation. A serious one.
Costly.
Reportable. Potentially enough to jeopardize contracts, funding, regulatory standing, everything they relied on. I watched them scramble. I watched the storm they created consume them. And as I sat there, a strange calm settled over me, a pivot from pain to clarity. They had fired the only person keeping them operational, and they were about to learn what that really meant. But this wasn't the moment to step in. Not yet. Revenge wasn't about anger, it was about timing. About precision, about letting the consequences unfold naturally until the pressure was unbearable. And I knew the breaking point was coming. The real question was how far they would fall before they realized the damage they caused. Or how much further I was willing to let them fall. In the morning, everything shifted and felt strangely quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. For days, I had watched the chaos unfold from a distance. Managers arguing in glass offices, compliance officers making unplanned visits, staff being sent home because operations had been halted. But chaos alone wasn't revenge. It was only the beginning. And I wasn't interested in watching them struggle. I wanted them to understand. So I waited until the moment their desperation reached its peak. That moment arrived when I saw the company's emergency notification go out. Every operator and contractor in the region had been contacted, summoned, bribed. I knew what they would find. No one could legally substitute for my license. They were cornered, and the walls were closing in fast. At noon sharp, I walked into the regulatory office, calm, prepared, steady. I wasn't there to complain. I wasn't there to plead. I was there to report a violation so large, so unforgivable, it would demand action. I submitted every detail, dates, times, mandatory oversight logs showing no licensed operator on site, compliance records proving I was the only qualified person they had ever employed. I handed over copies of my certifications. I didn't embellish a single thing. I didn't have to. The investigator's eyebrows lifted as he read. His expression hardened. And in that unspoken moment, I knew the storm that was coming wouldn't be one I created alone. It would be reinforced by the laws they had broken. They had dug their own grave. I was simply handing them the shovel. By the time I stepped outside, my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a surge of adrenaline so intense it felt electric. This was it. The point of no return. I drove straight to the facility, arriving just as state vehicles and auditors began pulling in behind me. The parking lot that once felt like a daily routine now looked like a battlefield. Employees stood outside in clusters, murmuring, confused. And through the glass front doors, I could see managers pacing like trapped animals, caught between denial and panic. When I pushed open the door, a hush rippled through the lobby. They turned. Faces paled. My supervisor forced a strained smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We didn't expect." He stopped mid-sentence when a state investigator stepped in behind me. The look on my supervisor's face told me he finally understood exactly why I was there. That their mistake wasn't just disastrous, it was catastrophic. As the investigators fanned out through the building, gathering files, questioning staff, reviewing security logs, the truth unraveled in real time. Every corner they inspected revealed another layer of negligence. Unauthorized activity, missing oversight signatures, violated protocols, and at the center of it all, the absence that started it. Mine. For years, I had been the invisible safeguard, the one whose quiet competence kept everything running smoothly, and they had discarded that without a second thought. Now it was all collapsing under the weight of their own arrogance. At one point, I walked past the main control room, the place I had spent countless hours ensuring everything was compliant and safe. Now the screens were dark,
Covered.
abandoned, a visual reminder that without me, the heartbeat of the facility had stopped entirely. My supervisor tried approaching me again, desperation cracking through the thin veneer of professionalism. "Maybe we can work something out," he murmured, as if he hadn't spent weeks orchestrating my removal. We didn't realize the situation. If we had known. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You should have," I said simply. "It was your job to know." He stared at me for a long moment, searching my expression for mercy. There was none left. Hours passed. Questions intensified. Documents were seized. Auditors shut down entire sections of the facility. And for the first time, management realized the gravity of what they'd done. The fines would be substantial. The suspensions are unavoidable. Their contracts were already under review. The facility itself stood on the edge of being temporarily or permanently shut down. And I was no longer an afterthought. I had become the center of the investigation.
The key.
The missing piece. By late afternoon, as the last investigator stepped out with boxes of evidence, I stood alone at the end of the hallway, watching the frantic scramble echo into silence. The building felt unfamiliar, like a memory that no longer belonged to me. One by one, the managers were escorted into private rooms for final statements.
My supervisor was last.
His face was drained of color, his step slow. As he passed me, he paused, not out of arrogance this time, but out of defeat. Did you do this on purpose?" he asked quietly. I met his eyes. I told the truth. And the truth was enough to destroy them. When I stepped outside into the fading afternoon light, the air felt different. Whiter.
Cleaner.
Like I had shed the weight of years in a single day. My revenge hadn't been loud. It hadn't been dramatic in the way movies show revenge. No shouting, no scenes, no theatrics. It was precise. It was earned. And it was final. But as I walked toward my car, one thought lingered in the back of my mind. One last thread pulling at the edges of everything that had happened. Now that the truth is out, what would collapse next? In the weeks that followed, the world I had once stepped into every morning continued to fall apart. Only this time, I wasn't trapped inside it. I watched from a distance, no longer as an employee, but as someone who had survived it. And strangely, survival felt quieter than I expected. There was no triumphant celebration, no dramatic climax echoing through my apartment walls. Just a stillness, a clarity, that settled over me as the consequences played out on their own. The investigation moved quickly. Too quickly for them to recover. Regulators issued temporary shutdown orders while they reviewed every file, every process, every oversight. Clients withdrew, not wanting to be associated with the scandal that had erupted around the facility. Audits expanded beyond the walls I once worked in, uncovering even deeper issues. Corners cut, safety procedures ignored, logs falsified long before I ever walked out with my box of belongings. They weren't just wrong. They were reckless. And firing me had peeled back the surface layer they had worked so hard to keep intact. Within a month, 3 managers, including my supervisor, were suspended pending disciplinary hearings. An official statement was released acknowledging significant operational failures and misjudgments in staffing decisions. They didn't dare name me directly, but anyone who knew the story could read between the lines. The facility became a warning tale in industry forums, a case study, a lesson in arrogance. And through all of it, I learned something about revenge that no one ever tells you. Sometimes it doesn't roar, it echoes. It lingers in the spaces where your voice was once ignored. It grows in the cracks created by people who underestimated you. It becomes the mirror they are forced to look into when everything they tried to hide finally comes to light. But revenge didn't erase everything. There were nights I lay awake replaying the moment I received that termination letter, the sting of being told I was redundant. Even after everything that happened, those words still pressed against me like a bruise. I realized that the pain wasn't just from losing the job, it was from being treated as if I didn't matter, as if years of dedication could be swept away with a single decision made behind closed doors. Healing wasn't instant. It wasn't easy. It came in small steps, like the first morning I woke up without thinking about the facility, or the moment I logged into my email to find new opportunities waiting for me. Doors I'd never considered before began to open. Recruiters reached out. People who had heard my story, in bits and whispers, through networks and industry circles, wanted to talk to me. Not because I was the victim, but because I had become the one thing they valued most, proof that standing your ground can change everything. Eventually, I accepted a new position, one where my license, my experience, and my voice were treated with respect instead of fear. I walked in on my first day with a quiet confidence I hadn't felt in years. Not because I needed validation, but because I already knew my worth. Revenge hadn't given me back the job I lost. It gave me something far more powerful, myself. And as I settled into my new life, I realized something else. Something I wish I had understood much earlier. When people betray you, when they underestimate you, when they try to erase you, it says more about their character than it ever does about your value. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to those who wrong you is simply refuse to disappear. But the impact of what happened didn't stop with me. I heard through former colleagues that new safeguards were being implemented industry-wide. More oversight, better training, stronger protections for licensed operators. My story, my fall and rise, had sparked conversations far beyond the walls of that facility. Conversations that might protect someone else from facing what I did. And that, more than anything, felt like justice. Still, every now and then, I catch myself wondering, if they had taken just one moment to think before firing me, would any of this have happened? Would they have avoided the collapse? Or was this downfall the result of something deeper, something no one could have stopped? Because here's the truth I came to accept. Revenge isn't always about destroying the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's about exposing the truth they tried so desperately to hide. It's about making sure the next time someone thinks about discarding you so carelessly, they remember exactly what it cost them. And so, as I move forward, I carry one lingering question, one I'll leave with you. When someone tries to write you out of your own story, will you let them? Or will you show them why you should never have been underestimated in the first place?